Welcome to Rebecca Sounds Reveille. This episode is so empowering. I have a special guest with me today who is a longtime friend, as well as someone who is inspirational in a number of different ways. Now, like many of us who are kind of type A personalities, we wear many hats. And so does my guest today with me is, again, my personal friend and inspiration, not only to me, but to others. She's an author, she's an advocate, she's a speaker. We're going to go into a lot more about her background, but you may be familiar with her first book, The Shattering. It's a child's innocence betrayed. And she has recently come out with The Shattering too. We're going to talk about both of these things and not how child abuse or sexual abuse from childhood causes victimization into a permanent status throughout life, but how situations, trials, and tribulations actually empower us to move forward and live thriving lives, helping others. With me today, Marsha, Barth. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Rebecca. Thank you for having me on today.
I am so excited, and I know that you prefer to be called Marty, so if it's all right, we will do that from here forward.
Yes, all my friends call me Marty, yes.
So if we go back a while from when we first started talking when I was doing radio.
Yes, that's a few years ago, yes.
Yes, so there's been a lot that has happened, and I've got to tell you, with what I see you doing, it's absolutely amazing, because not only are you writing and you are doing speaking, your speaking arrangements are very impactful, because there was state persons of substance and significance which make change, and you have been working in prison ministry, and you're a mom and a grandma. And so you have all these different hats that you do, but essentially they all tie in together, and they tie in from where you made a choice and were equipped with tools and chose to utilize those tools to make a difference in your life very, very far back.
Yes, yes. Actually, I think the choices began, I didn't even realize it when I was a child, but I was actually, to say it bluntly, I was blessed to have the influence that led me to a source that I could begin to heal, even though I didn't even know I was healing at the time. Mostly in my childhood, I say as a childhood we survive, as a young adult we deny, and as an older adult we begin to go on a healing journey.
Oh gosh, that just brings chills, because I feel so strongly that while we have all these different cultures and subcultures that we come from, and no matter where we're at in the entire world, we're still human beings. And so even though we are designed as individuals and each of us is unique, we still sort of are in three different types of person. And that is one where we have experiences that are very sometimes traumatic, or trials and tribulations that have been presented to us. And without knowing what to do, we stay stuck in those. And unfortunately, a lot of people kind of use this situation to remain stuck. And you'll hear people say, well, that's just an excuse. Their behavior now is an excuse. They should have dealt with certain things. And I understand that. But whether or not they're excuses, or whatever the case may be, that they haven't moved forward, they're still in the position where they're kind of stuck, and they haven't been able to utilize tools that they may not even know exist to help them move forward. And then we have the category where here we are, we're starting to learn about them. We have some of the tools. We might be applying them, then again, we might not. And maybe it's because of fear. And then, of course, like you said, there's this other stage. And we begin to say, I can't live this way any longer and I need to move forward. What do I need to do? And I'm doing it, period. I'm sticking to this, and I actually overcome it because my decision to thrive versus die mentally, emotionally, and spiritually is more important than anything else. And so I love how you just put that, because age is so true to how we address situations in life.
Well, when you're a child and these things happen, you have to understand you don't know what normal is. You may not know what normal is until you hit 28 or 30, or maybe not even then. So when you're a child, all you can do is survive the situation that you are raised in. Now, for many, that's good, but for many, it is not. And statistics are really overwhelming. I don't go to statistics a lot, only for awareness, because they zap your hope. Every 8 minutes in America, a child is sexually assaulted.
And you know, as you say that, Marsha, I'm thinking about my focus on domestic violence and other traumas that has been such a passion to help people with. And the one thing that I have found is, and I really like that you said about the statistics, because really they're not accurate, because in these particular situations, more often than reported, they go unreported. So really these are low numbers.
Well, if you add other statistics to that, 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys, that's what it's estimated as the statistics. But that's based on a 40% report rate. So really you have to double those numbers. And then if you look at the stats on children 12 and under, there's a high percentage that are never reported in children 12 and under. We can't even find good stats for them, because a lot of times children under 12 aren't believed. Yet the stats they do have show that there's a good 50% and even higher, depending on how you break down these stats, that the highest percentage of children that are sexually abused are under 12 years old. That's based on the stats they have. But the stats aren't accurate even that they have because of this inaccuracy. But the stats are there to make people aware. You can't change, Rebecca, what you're not aware of.
Yes.
And it hasn't worked putting it under the rug and just saying, oh, well, you know, that's for this certain group or this poverty group or this. It hits every barrier. There is no barrier that it doesn't cross. It crosses economic, it crosses racial, it crosses educational. I mean, people have a mentality that it only affects people in the South or people that are poor or people of different ethnics, and that's not true. It crosses every barrier. And until we as a society recognize that, we can't even begin to deal with the problem. Another stat is that 60 million, it's estimated that there are 60 million survivors of just child sexual abuse. That's not physical abuse, that's not emotional abuse, that's not domestic abuse, that's just child sexual abuse. And so I tell people, you know, when people, they don't like that subject and they're like, that, you know, right away you can almost see the reaction in people's eyes. I said, try to understand that with these kind of statistics, there's no way in your life that you are not going to be affected inadvertently somewhere in your life by this situation, whether it's a neighbor or a coworker or, God forbid, a family member. Somewhere it's impossible for you not to be affected by this. So why not learn how to be aware of it? But even better yet, why not learn how to go from victim to victor? And that's what we really, I know you and I've talked, we really want to show people how to go from the victim mentality to becoming a victor. And I don't say that lightly, because it is a journey. And anyone who's listening that has went through this abuse, the reason I'm saying about going to victim to victor is not to make it sound simple, but to give you a hope that you can be whole again. People don't know that. And earlier you were saying about whether they use it for an excuse. Like I say, I've been going into the prisons for 10 years. I speak at prisons, I speak at recoveries, I speak at addictions, I speak to college criminology and psychology, I speak at universities, I speak to state. My favorite place, though, is the prisons and the recovery, because my understanding, again, they don't have good stats, but I said at a state meeting one time, I was speaking and I was actually giving some input, and I said, the stats that I can find basically say that 80%, this doesn't excuse anyone, but
Right.
80% of the inmates that are in some type of prison are there, they've been sexually abused. And a woman beside me from another group said it's closer to 100%. It doesn't excuse them being in prison. I've never excused anyone for being in prison, their accountability, because that's part of your healing, is taking the accountability.
Yes.
But,
yes, it is.
But so many of them do not understand how to heal.
Mm-hmm.
We live in a society that has the mentality. We don't live in the Leave It to Beaver generation anymore. We live in the society that the mentality says, get a life, get over it, and what's your problem? We've lost compassion, we've lost understanding, and we become a hardened society because many of the people in society have become hardened. If we can go and give people a pathway that they could begin to see, first of all, where they are stuck, because a lot of them in prison don't know they're stuck till they get in prison. But and I do a teaching on that. You and I've talked about that. But if they can see where they're stuck, and then you can walk them through the different stages and try to show them how they can get unstuck. I tell you, Rebecca, I've seen it. I've seen it right in their faces. I tell my husband, I said, you go in and they look at you like you're all cleaned up. What in the world are you going to tell me?
Yes.
And you begin to talk to them, and you begin to share your heart and your story, and you talk about this healing journey. And I literally, in 10 years, it's never been different, not once. I literally see the veil come off of their eyes. Mm-hmm. And I see the tears come. And then I see the hope come that maybe I can be whole. She made it. Maybe I can make it. And then that's when I really can take off. Then, because now they're receiving, and that's when I kind of go for the gold. And I try to present it to them in that limited time to say, yes, you can make it.
Well, you know, Marty, I just from my own personal life, the locations that I've lived in prior to being in law enforcement and then after having been in law enforcement, the thing that I have found with people is, one, on the streets, respect is everything. Two, trust is huge. It's a huge issue. So when we talk to people who have made choices, regardless of how their choices ended up getting them there, from whatever experience it was, bitterness that ended up ensuing, or because of no other choice but to take the lesser of two evils to live or survive, whatever the case may be, people, and this even holds true for those who have never been on this side of the spectrum, is that they can identify better with someone who has been through the situation as closely parallel or even halfway as parallel, because there's truth in it and now you're tangible. And so I can understand that tremendously. And for those out there who are not in the system, as we say, to be able to receive ministry from someone, or like myself, I was a pre-release coordinator, and we had I taught a 30-day intense program for those who were getting ready to be paroled. And the whole purpose in that program was to equip them with the skills and the tools so that they were not making the same choices when they left, and that they could move forward in their life and become healthy. Well, regardless of where we're all at, there is such a huge factor of trust, because number one, when these types of issues happen to us, the people normally in the statistics are those closest to you, family member, friend of the family. So there's already a trust issue to begin with. So and in your particular case, your story is shared and you are right there, people can identify with you and see and realize that there is hope.
And that's the key word. If anybody's listening, I want them to focus on that word hope, because I think you and I is going to talk a lot about that. And there's a favorite quote in the second book, and it must have came from way down deep from the good Lord, because I say hope is tangible. See, we look at hope. I tell them when I go into the prisons, what are you hoping in? Because if you hope amiss, it's really not hope. It's a wish. I wish I could get out of prison. I wish I could change my life. I'm not talking about that kind of hope. I'm talking about a hope that is actually tangible, that every soul can grab hold of, and it can change your life. It can become real to you. And it's there for everyone who dares to grab out, reach it, hold on to it, and it will change your life. I tell a little story when I was young, and it just seems to get that point across. When I was little, and a lot of this is in the book, and the books are novels, so they're not how-to books, they're not graphic. Everyone in life, Rebecca, every single person that I've ever met in my life, and I would like to meet one that isn't, because I'd like to know how they got as far as they did, but every person in life is shattered at some point in their life.
Yes.
And we need to talk about that. When you get shattered, whether it's child abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, whatever shatters you, bullying in school, domestic abuse, all these things shatters your hopes, your dreams, your trust, your heart, your identity.
Yes.
Your purity, your innocence, and your spirit. That's a lot of shattering of what makes up who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And when that identity is shattered, we don't know how to put it back together again. Most of the time, our focus is on, how do I survive this?
Mm-hmm.
How do I get past this? How do I just get, when I was a child, how do I call this, just have a good day? A good day for me was when the kids didn't bully me in school, or make fun of my shoes, or make fun of my clothes, or make fun that I had a teacher one time who said my score grade out loud, and he said I must have lucked out or studied awful hard, because I shouldn't have been able to make that kind of grade. It was good. It just fired me up, and I just was determined to ace every test just to prove a point. But when a child is continually shattered, they don't know what their identity is. So they focus on the survival. And as that little child, I was blessed to have 3 older brothers. We were 3, 2, 1, and 0. That was our ages. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When I hit 2, we were 2, 3, 4, 5. 2 of my brothers are born the same year. We're very, very good. And that closeness, every Sunday morning, we would go out the door. I wrote a little blog about that just last night, actually, and I said we would go out the door, we'd get ourselves up, try to get ourselves ready, eat some cereal. My brothers would usually have it on their shirt. Their shirts would be half in and half out. We would walk up this dirt road, like a Norman Rockwell painting. It's still a dirt road back in West Virginia. And we had a little Cocker Spaniel, and she would follow us. And there we'd be walking up the hill, the 4 of us, and our little dog following us. And my shoes would be all dusty from kicking rocks on the way. And we'd go to this little country church. And at that little country church, a hope was born in my heart, because I learned of a God who didn't care where I came from. He didn't care what happened to me at night when my dad snuck into my room. He loved me for who I was. And that put such a hope in my heart that to this day, I can remember as a little girl, I had got or won a little bookmark in Sunday school. And I was so tickled with it, I thumbtacked it into my wall. Now, back then, the bedroom light wasn't a switch. You had a pull string. Some might remember when you had a pull string to turn on your light on the ceiling. Well, I couldn't reach it, so I would climb up on the foot of my bed and tiptoe. I had hillbilly legs, so I would balance myself on the beam of the bed, and I would reach up and turn the light on, but I'd have this little bookmark in my hand, and I would hold it up to the light, and then in one step, I'd jump off and pull the string and turn the light out at the same time. And then I'd put that little bookmark back into the wall. Then I'd go to bed, and I'd put my babies around me, my little baby dolls, because I felt like them and the pillows would protect me. And I'd lay there and I'd look at that little bookmark. And that bookmark had a picture of Jesus at the top. And in the bottom of the bookmark, it had a velvet shield with a little cross. And when you would hold that cross up to the light, it would make it glow in the dark. And I would lay there, I would look at that little cross on my wall, and it brought me such hope and such comfort. And it just, once hope is born in you, that's the first new tool in your toolbox. And I was tickled to hear you talk about toolboxes, because I use that example in prison too. I tell them, you've got to empty your toolbox. And they look at me strange, and I said, you don't have to raise your hand, but let me check your toolbox when I mention these, and check to see if you have any of these tools in there. I said, do you have denial? Do you ever use denial in your life to cope with things? What about minimization? What about justification? What about intimidation and manipulation? And what about control? And by now they're smiling. I go, what about anger? What about selfishness? I said, have you ever used those tools? And I says, or is that your mainstay of dealing and coping with problems? And then I look at them and I say, how's it working? Because it doesn't work. And I look at them and I said, and I'll tell you why it doesn't work. It doesn't work because there's no accountability, and there is no mercy, and there is no love in using any of those tools.
Yes.
I said, so you've got to recognize that up to now, you've dealt with your problems to survive.
Yes.
But you cannot continue to survive using those tools because they don't work. It's kind of like going down the river and grabbing for a corn husk going by, hoping that can keep you afloat. And maybe it sturdies you for a few minutes, but sooner or later you'll go down. It's like using a butter knife for a hammer. Us women do that sometimes.
It's true.
It doesn't work. He will literally bend the nail or fly off the wall, or you'll hit your finger and go in. But you have to have the right tools. And most people don't know what they are. So you empty all those tools, and now we start putting new tools in the toolbox. And the first one is a hope, but it has to be a hope that's tangible.
Mm-hmm.
That hope for me, I never blink an eye saying it, was finding a God that loved me.
Yes.
And people will say, well, Marty, did that stop the abuse? You know, people get very mad at God.
They do.
Yes.
They do. And they will even say, well, if there is a God, then why do you let it happen?
You know, and I get asked that so much. And I had an amazing thing happen to me probably when I was in my, I want to say 40s without going back too far or saying how old I am now, but probably when I was in my 40s, I had read this story. It was about an angel, and it was in the guidepost. And it was a beautiful, It was a beautiful story. And this angel actually rescued this young boy from getting beat again by his father, his alcoholic father. And he survived it because a real angel had intervened. So I found myself the next day, Rebecca, I was so happy about that. But I found something churning inside that just bothered me. So I did what a lot of women do when we're bothered. I cleaned house. A woman can we can clean the house and have it done and not even know we did it when we're upset.
Well, I mean, okay, so that's a real telltale for many of us. If your house is really kind of messy, the woman's in a good spirit. But if you walk in her house and it's clean, something's on her mind.
Especially if she did it all in one day.
Right.
And so, I had walked with God for a long time. And I share this a lot with Christians too, because Christians are the worst of this. I mean, you will find most people in the prisons, they'll be honest with you. People who are trying to walk in by faith and all, a lot of times they won't be honest with you, because a Christian isn't supposed to be sad. A Christian isn't supposed to be upset. And, God forbid, a Christian isn't supposed to get upset with God. So, I mean,
or have certain thoughts.
Yes. And so what we do is, a lot of people do this too, is we do the justification route and we put the cloak of righteousness on it, and we say, I'm not really envious of someone, I just don't think they deserve it. Or I'm not really gossiping, I'm just talking to someone to try to, maybe I can find a reason to help them. We put anything, we call anything but what it is, because we know that we feel that we're not supposed to feel that way. So we don't go through the process of healing. We say it's under the blood when it's really been put under the rug. People ask me what happened to me, and I said, well, God shook my rug. And he began doing this very day. And so I was troubled in my heart, and I kept feeling God in my heart say, why don't you tell me what's bothering you? And I just shook it off, and I just went back to cleaning. And it tugged at me for quite a while. And finally I sat down and I said, and you laugh, Rebecca, I was real pious at first. I said, okay, God, you want to know what's wrong? I says, I'll tell you what's wrong. I said, I want to know where my angels were. I said, you said there was angels there to help out. Where were my angels when my dad abused me? I had given my heart to you. I was even trying to walk with you. Where were my angels? And when God didn't strike me dead with that, I went a little further. I said,
okay.
And I said, and God, where were you? Where were you? And as I began to say that, Rebecca, this was a real step in my healing without me knowing it. When I began to say that, the tears just began to flow, and all this hurt and pain that I didn't even know I was still carrying just flowed out of me. And I was just like, and I got even bolder with God. I'm being very honest. I got so with God. So he didn't strike me dead. And so I got a little bit more sarcastic, and I said, God, I said, where were you? And I said, why didn't you come and help? And why didn't you do this? And I said, I was a tomboy growing up, Rebecca. So I said, did I wear my angels out? I said, you kept giving me another angel, and I was just too much, and I wore them out. And I laugh now, but I was serious. I was like, and growing up and being abused and being treated the way I was, I kind of thought, well, maybe I wasn't special enough to God, because of all these feelings. And what God was doing was he was pulling that way out of the depths of my heart. And so I just poured it out, and I was kind of raising my voice, where were you, God? And did I wear them out? And I just continued on, and I was just like, and I just started crying. And I will never forget this. It shows the reality of God. And I can only share my experience, but I'm telling you, there was such a presence that filled that room. I could feel the love of God, and I could feel, my mom used to call us for dinner by putting her fingers in her mouth and doing the country whistle, like she could whistle. And I felt like God had whistled all the angels I had worn out. And I felt like, I want you to see this, because the room felt with such a presence of God. I was home by myself. And at that point, as I felt that and the tears came, this most loving presence of God spoke to my heart and said, I'll never forget it. He said, every time you cried, your angels cried with you. And every time you cried, I cried with you. but neither them or even me as God could change or take away the power of choice of your Father and of those who abused you. They had a power of choice, but we never left you.
Yes.
But we never.
And you made a good point there, Marty, because for those who don't really understand why certain things happen, here on earth we are given what's called free will. So even if we're Christians or we've decided to be followers in faith, because of that free will, we can still make choices that are not good choices. And
Yes.
we are allowed that.
Yes, and that's the sad part. And I think that's why I feel such a passion when I go into the prisons and to the reentry and the drug recovery and the family recoveries. I love the advocacy part. I love making a difference with meeting the governor and giving him a book and having a congresswoman, God bless her, she endorsed the second book. And I love that part of it. But my true heart and passion is when you go in and see the broken and shattered, I won't say all of them, but I'd say a high majority, they do want a different life. I don't think anyone was born to say, I want to walk around in green or orange and I want to live my life that way. I don't think
Yes.
You ask a little 4-year-old, what do you want to be when you grow up? Oh, I want to go to prison and live, I mean.
I agree.
But they don't know that. And here's the other thing, Rebecca, so many times, and I think this will hit a chord with all of us, no matter how we've been shattered. When we get hurt, and I've talked and I do this study, but when we get hurt and we feel pain and we feel anger, the way we try to survive that so often is we cease to feel. We harden our heart. Because if we don't feel pain, then we can cease to feel. The problem is that doesn't work either. After a while, we can't cease to feel the pain, so people begin to drink and they begin to do the drugs, or they begin to do anything that can divert from the pain they feel. The other problem, not only with the addiction, is that if you cease to feel long enough and numb the pain instead of dealing with the pain and healing, the problem is you can lose the capacity to feel.
Yes.
And the problem, too, is that we don't have a cold and hot spigot. You can't just turn the spigot off for pain and think, I'll still feel the love for it. When you feel, you block the love as well as the pain.
Yes.
And so you mix up love with someone who helps you pay the bills, or someone who treats you kind and then ends up after you, once you've even dared to trust in part, then they begin. I was blessed this way. I didn't go through domestic abuse, but I saw domestic abuse in my home.
Mm-hmm.
So, people don't even know what love is, because to them, just having someone in their life that maybe gives them some sense of value, well, they love me.
Yes.
But they turn around and beat you up. They turn around and demean you. They turn around and make you dependent on them and give you no freedom so they can control you. But they love me. That's not love, but they don't know what love is.
That's right.
And that's where I feel a passion and a desire to go out and, first of all, tell people, look at your life. Look at where you're stuck. And then begin to take steps on the healing journey. And, you can go ahead and ask, but somewhere maybe we can go over the chart. It's in the second book. I thought at the last minute, everywhere I go and I use this chart that I made up, I'm surprised at how many counselors and how many psychologists and how many inmates, they always ask, can I have a copy of it? So at the last minute with the second book, I asked the publisher if they could please put the chart in the back of the book, and they did. So, but I've had good results from that. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a counselor. I'm just someone who's walked the walk and walked the journey. And
sometimes, Marty, I think that's bigger than someone who has studied books. And when someone like yourself has taken the time to really not only has gone through and done the research, you really are able to put more together than some people who have a degree or a specialized practice, because they don't have any of the experience that's really needed to assess and make a full connection with things. I know a lot of times our society really places such high value on a piece of paper. And yet there's sometimes where people like yourself will have far more insight and have better tools in their toolbox to equip those to help others.
That's the second toolbox. I do tell them, I says, you get a good counselor. I says, but don't expect the counselors to do what you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
I always say, counselors will help you deal with the problem. And I'm just going to be blunt. This has been my experience. I mean, if people differ, they can differ. Counselors can help you deal with the problems, but only God can heal you from those problems. Counselors can tell you to find your identity that's been shattered, but only God can give you that identity because he created you with that identity. And so you go on this healing journey, and only God can make you whole again. He's the one who gave me the strength. He's the one who gave me the value. He's the one who told me I was more than. I was more than that little girl who people thought had dusty shoes on and didn't have the shiny patent shoes and the lacy socks in Sunday school, you know. I was more than just what people called me by my maiden name, that I couldn't get good grades. Because God told me when I was 12, he said, if you put me first. And that's when the abuse was at its worst. But he said, if you put me first, I'll give you the desires of your heart. I had two desires at 12 years old, Rebecca. Number one, I wanted to go to college. Now, we were so poor we didn't have running water till I was 6 years old.
Oh my goodness.
I often tell people this, I often say this story at the state events. I said, well, we lived in a 3-room house. That's not to be mistaken with a 3-bedroom house. It was a 3-room house. It was not HGTV approved. The bathroom was 150 foot up the hill.
Ouch.
Yep. And if you went 150 foot kind of to the right and a little further up the hill, the horseshoe pegs. And if you went about another 150 foot from the horseshoe pegs, the cliff went straight down. So we learned to not chase the ball after the horseshoe pegs.
Yes, yes.
And people asked me, well, were you afraid of the cliff? And I said, no, I was afraid of the outhouse. And they asked me why, spiders or this or that. I said, no. I said, you got to remember, they cut those holes for big people.
Yes.
I used to have nightmares that I'd fall down the hole and they wouldn't find me for 3 days. Forget the cliff.
Oh my goodness.
But I say that because see, what we go through and what we have, and this is a big mistake of society, it didn't define me. It tried to define me. My name that I was born into didn't define me. What I had or didn't have, running water or not, didn't define me. What teachers thought of me did not define me. What anyone thought of me didn't define me. Because God took something broken and shattered, and he put it, and I tell this story about, I call it the cup story. I call it the Humpty Dumpty story. And broken we can fix, Rebecca, but shattered we can't. If I have my grandmother's favorite little mug that I still have of hers, and I drop it or the handle comes off, I mean, I can glue it back together again. And I will, even if it has a chip or two in it, because it's special to me. But if I drop it on the floor and it shatters in a million pieces, I can't put it back together again. I can't get all the little shards. And so I reluctantly sweep it up in a pan and I throw it away and I know that it's gone. And that's what happens to us as people. And that's what happens to us as children and adults. Any abuse we've suffered or anything that has shattered us, we feel that we might as well, especially people that are on drugs, well, I'm not worth anything. I might as well sweep it up and throw it away. But I tell them, God's not a Humpty Dumpty God. He doesn't need the pieces to put back together again. And even if he did it that way, everybody would see your cracks. They would see all the cracks and all the fissures in me, and they would be, and it would be horrible. But he took all the pieces and he made a new creature out of me. And he showed me my identity. And he showed me I'm more than. And I'm not more than or better than anyone else in that state. But I'm more than what people had always thought that I was. And
yes,
I'm a king's kid. I'm not just someone that doesn't matter. And the one thing I tell every single time I go into prison, I always look at them and I said, if you don't remember anything else I tell you today, I want you to remember that you matter. That you matter.
that's right.
And I had one prisoner, one male prisoner said to me one time, he says, my father always said I would be a nothing, I was a nothing, and I'd end up in prison. He said, but you told me today that I mattered. And when I was that 12-year-old broken little girl, I said, Lord, I want to go to college. And I didn't have 2 cents to rub together. And I said, and I want a Christian husband. I want to have a Christian husband someday. I don't want to marry someone who's going to drink and abuse me. Mm-hmm. And I didn't think that was possible either, because at that stage, as that little girl, my purity and innocence had been shattered. So I could see that a Christian man would want me. That was the value still that I had of myself. And through it all, God said, if you will put me first, Marty, he says, I will give you the desires of your heart. And those were the 2 desires, and I was 12. And when I was 18, my principal called me in the office, and I sat there nervously wondering what I had done, or if I got in trouble. And didn't know I had done anything wrong, but you sit in a principal's office, you don't, it doesn't matter if you think you did anything wrong or not. You wonder what you did wrong.
Yes.
And so I was about 17 or 18. And he was we were always told he was an ex-Marine drill sergeant. He had a crew cut, and all he had to do was look at you. And so I'm sitting in his office that day, and I'm fidgeting, and he looks at me, and he kind of smiles, and he says, are you going to college? And I said, well, I'd like to. I said, but I really don't have the finances. And he asked me, had I looked into it, were they accredited, and this, and he hasn't. Most of the answers were, I don't know, and I don't know. He said, long story short, him and his wife, she was a principal at another school, they took me to their house, let me stay overnight, drove me 100 miles to a college, talked to the people, gave them my grades, got me full scholarship. I went to college on full scholarship, and that's where I met Mike, who I've been married to 43 years, my Christian husband. And that promise was given to me when I was 12 years old. That's a God that's real. That's a God that's real. That's a God that if you dare hope in him when you don't feel you can hope in anything else, he will put the pieces back together again. That's a God that will give you a future when you didn't, and you don't have to live in your past. As you do that and take that walk, Rebecca, if we can touch on it, I have to tell people, and I don't have the chart, but like I say, it's in the book. But when we get hurt, we will always feel pain, and when we feel pain, we will feel anger. So the process of any time, if you go back and anybody thinks, when you get hurt, you feel pain. And when you feel pain, you get angry. That doesn't matter if it's emotional, physical, whatever hurt that is. I often say, it doesn't matter if Mother Teresa slammed her finger in a car door. She would not say, thank you, Jesus. She would feel hurt. She would feel pain. We are made that way. We have no choice over the hurt and the pain that we have. And we have no really control over the initial anger. Where it changes is that we then have a choice to remain angry, or what are we going to do with the anger would be the question I ask people. And I go down this list and I say, where are you stuck? Are you still stuck in your hurt, in your pain, in your anger? Or are you hanging on to anger? Because anger becomes a cloak of comfort. That sounds like it sounds like an oxymoron, but it gives us a false sense of power.
Yes, it does.
and we feel like no one's going to hurt me again, and I'm going to be in charge. And so we hang on to the anger. And what's the most common saying today with people? I have a right to be angry.
Yes.
Don't tell me not to be angry, because I have a right to be angry. And I'm not telling you that you don't. I mean, because anyone who's been abused unjustly, they do have a right to be angry.
Sure, yes.
But the question is, do you want to remain angry? And here and only here is the first time we have a choice. We don't have a choice to be hurt. We don't have a choice to be pain, to feel the pain. And we don't have a choice not to be angry at first. But the question where we begin to have a choice now is, do you want to remain angry? And then the next one I tell them, don't throw rocks at me yet. But the next question is, will you forgive? Will you forgive? And that is such a hard one. And I spend a lot of time when I'm in the prisons explaining what forgiveness is and what forgiveness isn't. Now, a lot of people will say, if you forgive someone, you won't be angry anymore. I don't get that. I think you got to get rid of the anger before you can forgive people.
I agree with you.
Now, I'll tell you what forgiveness isn't. And that way, if anyone's ready to turn this off or throw rocks at me, give me 1 second. Forgiveness does not mean that it was okay what they did. Forgiveness does not release them, of the accountability.
That's right.
What it does is it releases them of the debt. And you have to choose if you want to release them of the debt. The debt that my father owed me for abusing me, according to even God's word and man's law. But God's word was that a stone should have been put around his neck and he should have been thrown into the sea for hurting a child. That's what Jesus himself said should be done to anyone who hurts a child. That is the debt he owed me. If you loan me $1,000 and I forgive you of that debt, it doesn't release you of the accountability to get your finances together. It releases you of the debt that you just owe me. You still have that accountability. So I released my dad of the debt that he owed me, which was to go to hell, was to pay for what he did to me. Now, a lot of people aren't ready to do that. And if you're not ready to do that, it's because you're still really, really angry. And that's okay. But you have to choose, do you want to hang on to that anger? And you got to ask yourself, how's it working? Because I held on to anger for a long time. I got angry at God. I got angry at everyone. I would get so angry, boys didn't know whether to date me or to run because they knew I could beat them up. I had one boy one time and he kept picking on my cousin and I told him one day to leave him alone because he pushed him down the ditch and he made the mistake. He forgot I had 3 big brothers and he told me to make him, so I did. I beat him up and dragged him to a mud puddle. So boys didn't know whether to date me or to run the other way. But I did have a lot of anger and I didn't know it as a kid because I was grabbing anything I could to survive.
That's right.
But God said to me one day, do you want to hang on to that anger or do you want to give it to me? And then he began to deal very softly. I mean, you don't have to run into this. This is a journey. You do not have to complete this journey in one day. It's a journey and you take as long as you need. And if you don't know what to do with the anger, you simply say, God, would you take this anger from me? He asked me that one time and I gave him about 10 buts before I told him to take it. I said, but God, it wasn't right. He said, I know. He says, but do you want me to take it? And I said, but God, I must have went over that 10 times with God that day. He says, that's right. He said, and you do have a right to be angry. He said, but do you want me to take the anger from you? Mm-hmm. And I said, I don't like feeling angry, God. I don't like the feeling it gives me. And I began to ask him to take the anger. And he wasn't like a lot of people do. Well, you better forgive. I mean, he didn't do that. He let me hear first, Rebecca, from that. Then he began to say, do you really want to carry the debt? Because every time, if you owe me $1,000, every time I see you, see the name Rebecca, hear a song that reminds me of you, anything, I'm thinking, she still owes me $1,000.
Right.
And that's the way it is if we have this anger and unforgiveness. It's only hurting us. because
That's
we're
right.
the one that's being torn up. The person that did it may not even be thinking about it. So do you really want to hang on to unforgiveness? And what's it doing for you? Just give it to God too. And give the accountability. Trust me, God's a fair God. He's a just God. Remember, he was going to put a rock around their neck and throw them in the sea.
Right.
So let that judgment and accountability, give that right that you feel that you have, and actually you do, give that right to God and let him take that burden off of you. And then after that, you have to decide if you want to be in control or surrender. Now, once I ask people where they're stuck on that chart, and they may be stuck at all of them, I go down a list and I say, if you hold on to anger, and I'm going to pull the chart in a minute, but if you hold on to, up to the anger part, when you're hurt and you feel pain, that makes you a victim.
Yes.
I mean, we had no choice with that. When you feel anger, you may have survived it, but that makes you a survivor. Those three, no choice. If you hang on to an anger spirit, you will become a revenger, even if you only revenge against yourself.
Very true. This is very, very true.
If you release that anger, you become an overcomer. Now you can stop there, but if you go to the next step, if you hold on to unforgiveness, you will become a retaliator, even if it's to yourself.
Yes,
You'll direct it in or you'll direct it out. If you surrender that unforgiveness, you'll become a conqueror. If you hold on to control, and you're going to be in control and no one's going to make any difference because of that, then you will become an abuser, even if it's to yourself in drugs and alcohol. If you release that control and surrender, then you become a victor. So it's your choice. It wasn't your choice to be the victim and even the survivor, but it was your choice that you can go on and become a victor. And you either go from victim to life or you go from victim to death. And it's totally our choice.
Yes, and Marty, this has been so absolutely profound. And I think that the information that you have shared with our audience is going to change lives. And it's going to take those to places that they didn't think that they would ever get to. And I want to thank you so much for being on the show today. I want to thank you for your dedication in reaching out. And I also want to thank you, the audience, for tuning in, because this is a very sensitive subject, but we all, like Marty said earlier, we all are broken somewhere along the lines. I don't know of anybody that has the perfect life, or anyone who says, I've never come from something dysfunctional, because life has presented itself with different challenges, trials, tribulations, and traumas, and not one of us is immune from it, or we'd be perfect. And I don't know of anyone other than Christ who is or has been. So with that, both Marty and I really want to thank you again for taking an opportunity to listen to this. I hope that you have a chance to replay this and to not just hear the message and not just listen, but absorb what has been told today to you, because ultimately everything that has been shared will change your life. And if you have not had an opportunity yet to go to Marsha's website, go. And it's marshabarth.com. Go check it out. There's a lot of links in the article that accompanies this episode. You'll definitely want to get a copy of this either for yourself, for your friends, for family members. And like Marty was saying earlier, oftentimes there is someone that you just don't know their situation, that has been affected. And so just sharing this information, social media wise or via email, get that in their hands, because it's going to change a life, and you may not even realize that it was you that got the message and the tools to them to move beyond. I want to thank you again for tuning in today. We encourage you to watch Rebecca Sounds Reveille, along with all of the other shows here on the TLB TV network. This has been brought to you by TLB, the Liberty Beacon, and TLBTV.com. Have a very blessed day.
Yes.